This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular, advance your lean journey, and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
So welcome to the podcast, everybody. Once again, coming to you from the lovely confines of my capacious podcast studio in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I have started every episode with, today I get to chat with one of my really close friends, because that appears to be what I'm doing, is chatting with my really close friends. This is a fellow that I met probably 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, who has been, in many ways, we've been tracking our own careers. We both started in more conventional careers, jobs, working for people telling us what to do, when to show up, where to wear a tie and not. And then we veered off into doing the stuff that we really love doing. And I think we both found our stride in that. So welcome to the podcast, everybody. Rex Miller. You've heard of Rex. And you're going to hear a lot more from Rex. So we're going to spend an hour chatting about stuff. Welcome, Rex.
Thank you. Great to be here. And the first thing I'm going to say is one of your contributions is you saved me from obscurity in a particular cult of construction.
Wow. Yeah, and I've tried to decult that thing for years.
I think it's deculted.
Well, it's, you know what, I really think that my calling in life was to work in the built environment, just make the way we build things better so that they serve people better, and that they cost about what they should cost, and they take about as long as they should take, and they do stuff, in the world, because it's always good to have shelter. And you've been an evangelist, I think, around people. I remember an article in the Onion newspaper that they had finally located a guy in Boston who had gone in search of himself. The police were called in, make sure it was really him. But I think you helped people understand their inner selves over, the last 20 years that I've known you. And we've both been out there, saying, hey, stupid, it's the people, think about the people.
Yeah.
So congratulations on your good work and all the stuff that you're doing. So let's start with a little nostalgia. We met back, did we meet on Change Your Space, Change Your Culture? Was that where you invited me into that?
No.
Did we know each other before that?
We actually met when you were kind of the interim executive director for LCI.
Oh, right.
And I was struggling. I was excommunicated from the cult, so to speak, because I was talking about this thing called soft skills, and working on this book called The Commercial Real Estate Revolution, to the trust dynamic. And you were a big, we had some really good debates on trust and what trust really is, and Stephen Covey's kind of construct of trust. And I said, this is somebody who I can connect with. But what you did is you opened the door to LCI. I'd been trying to, get into LCI and talk about teams and team dynamics for 5 years until I met you. And then you suddenly opened the door, and then within a few years, soft skills was not a dirty word. And now it's kind of a front and center part of their agenda.
Well, yeah, it's funny that people now say that lean is about continuous improvement and respect for people. And it wasn't always that way.
No, right? It wasn't.
It was just in time delivery, and there's a metronome, and you better be hitting your stride.
Yeah.
But it was great to welcome you in, because the commercial real estate revolution changed so many people's perspectives. I mean, Bill Seed picked up that book read it on a plane coming back from a project, and went, whoa, we need to do something about this. And you were laudatory about the things that were happening in the lean world, and you had brought in folks like George Zettel and people who were really doing stuff. And so it was, I was happy to welcome you into our community because I believe so much in what you do. I don't always believe in exactly what you do, but I believe
Well,
in what it is that you do.
yeah, my
Um,
wife doesn't either, so that's
yeah, well, we've had some interesting debates, including in the
we have.
basement of my house in Idaho, and
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
dark nights in bars and things where you started moving from drinking 19 glasses of wine with me to sipping soda water or something. I don't know what happened, but there was something. Then you started eating oatmeal and getting on treadmills, and look at you, you're just wasting away. We're going to have to call you anorexic Miller now, as you're a shadow of your former self.
Yeah, actually, I'm probably in the best shape that I've been in 20 plus years, and it's been a journey. I mean, in the basement of your house in Driggs, Idaho, that's where the Change Your Space, Change Your Culture book really came to life. On the basement wall, I've got pictures of all the cards
Yeah.
on the basement wall, and we really worked through. It was our big room. It was our big room together, and everything was visual. We could step back and see the connection between the card. And you introduced me to those 4x6 cards, which I still use today. And in fact, here's some of them right here.
Oh, perfect.
And that was such. I'd never created a book like that and mapped it like that. And then never had somebody that really pushed me and challenged me hard like you did on some of those ideas.
Wow. Well, good. I think the ideas were really good. And the people we met there, I mean, I just have to thank you a thousand
Yeah.
times for the Steve Elliott's.
Yep.
That's really where I made the first connection with Barb Jackson. And I went on to teach in her program and had her, she's done a podcast. She's done a really
Neat.
popular podcast with me. And she's a crackerjack, and meeting the guys from Google and not actually being intimidated by them, but just kind of going,
Yeah. Yeah.
are you kidding? You guys actually do that? Lots of really good people in that space. And fortunately, our joint friend Mark Contra was there as well. And his podcast was last week. So
Oh, neat. Yeah.
we're
Neat.
stepping into it exactly the right moment. So when you got into the soft skill thing, because soft skills weren't necessarily popular at Hayworth where you had been before. There were sales skills, and obviously people wanted
Sure.
you to do things. But the idea that people, especially in construction, which was fairly brutal, fairly command and control, and the Cowboys were winning that one. Often when the Cowboys rode in to save the day by fixing problems that they had created, um, that's not the kind of culture that you necessarily want to create
Yeah. Yeah.
on your
That's called
project.
that's called Munchausen syndrome.
Yeah. Well, Baron Munchausen, right, wasn't he the guy?
Yep. Yep.
Let's create a problem and then go solve it. And
Right. Right.
I think there's enough problems in the world already that solving them is a pretty good idea. So you got all of us, me and Mark and the rest of us, into that core clarity business, thinking about strengths rather than thinking about
Right.
talents or proclivities or itches or whatever. I was very much driven around the strength finder and understanding what your strengths were. How did you get into that? How did you decide that's what you wanted to chase?
Uh, it was a low point in my life. So, to not belabor a long journey, but in 2000, I was the vice president for a Hayworth distributor, and I had moved from DC to Dallas. Then we got hit with the dot-com crisis. 70% of our business was telecom. It was Ericsson, Alcatel, MCI, and boom, within a year, I came into the office one day, and the owner of the company, who I knew I've known since 1978. He was my sales rep in furniture when I was a project manager, or as you guys say, project manager at Southwestern Bell. He called me into his office, said, "We don't need a vice president of sales. We need sales. So you can leave today or go back into commission sales." So literally, my whole life was turned upside down in a minute. I
Wow.
was close to bankruptcy. I within 4 or 5 months, I had $150,000 in credit card debt. I was 50 pounds heavier than I am today. So I know you talked about, you know, the anorexic Rex, but I was 195 pounds and I was stressed. I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't a good dad. And then I ran across a book called Now Discover Your Strengths, which came out in 2000. For the first time, I saw that what had happened to me is I became extremely good at what I was doing, but not jazzed about it. And so I call it, I was successfully normal. And then when all that got taken away from me, when the success got taken away, I had to figure out, why do I do what I do? And so the Clifton Strengths for me was the first time I started beginning to understand why I like certain things, why I'm naturally good at certain things. And then it was a journey to figure out myself. And then in figuring out myself, I started finding other people in similar kind of, how do I become my best self? Relationships aren't working, whatever it is. And I just started experimenting. And then I got certified in the coaching. So I was running a parallel track in the corporate world, rebuilding my life, getting out of debt, and all of that. And then I ran across a project that changed my life, which was with AmerisourceBergen. And I had a $7 million project that had this solution out of Calgary called SMED. It's a prefabricated wall, floor solution. Hayworth bought them. Nobody was buying office furniture during the dot-com crash. And so I went back to my roots, which was project management. In my mind, I thought, it's a no-brainer. It should be cheaper, should be better. But we were always 15% higher. I finally found a client who was interested in the solution, wanted it. It was a $7 million project, which would have been a commission that would help me. At the 12th hour, the CFO said, if it's a penny more than traditional construction, we're not buying it. So this is where the team and the soft skills come in. I worked with a developer. I don't know if you met him. He was part of the commercial real estate revolution. His name was Rick Nelson. He was with Transwestern. And I said, Rick, could you do me a favor? Could you ask Turner Construction to provide you 2 pre-construction quotes, one with walls, one without. Let me work with the subs for 3 weeks to see if we can even come close to conventional construction. And 2 things happened. One, we came in 85 cents a square foot less than traditional construction by looking at the rule of thumb pricing that estimators were doing, not taking into consideration the shifting in how the whole way the project was delivered and how you would estimate it. 2, the value of bringing people in early, working together for a common purpose. That was revelation for me, watching that. And then I was convinced that I wasn't the problem. This is kind of the Billy Bean thing. Did I fail baseball? Was I the failure, or was the system? Did the system evaluate it differently?
Right.
And that was the catalyst. So from there, shifting construction and shifting to soft skills and building the environment for people to work well together, to collaborate, became a focus.
Well, you actually happened to stumble on 2 of the most subversive and pervasive problems that we have in construction and design, I would say.
Okay.
And the first problem that you stumbled on was our failure to use data in real time, because we use historical data or what we're kind of comfortable with. I haven't found a contractor yet, and this has surprised me, who goes back and looks at the estimate that they had for a project and figures out how close it was to actually how much it cost to build, because they don't have time. Well, and I say, well, you have everything at time.
Yeah.
And I think the second thing that you ran into that has always been a pervasive problem is that nobody ever talked to the workers about what they could do. And empowering the workers to give you their input on how you can put this thing together is enormous, right? I mean, those are...
It was, I mean, yeah, when we worked with the flooring rep and once they understood, they didn't have to cut around drywall or any, they had a free open floor. Once we talked to the cabling guy and found out, oh, I don't have to go through the ceiling, it'll take me a week to do that, they could pre-terminate in their shop and roll it out in the floor. That was it was a day per floor versus a week per floor.
Yeah, it was funny. The first time, when I was working at Center Block, I suggested that we use raised floors so that we could have them as facilitation spaces, and you don't have to put, sockets in the slab. So just have a raised floor. And the estimator came back to me and said, "Oh, that's $200 a square foot for the raised floor." And I went, "Why?" He said, "Well, the floor costs about $15 a square foot, but I got to get my electricians to crawl in there and wire those things." And I went, "Dude, they wire them in the factory." You can order the raised floor with all the sockets that you want, all the little panels that you want. They just come out and they throw them in. And he went, "Really?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, it's like $27 a square foot." And he went,
Wow.
"Oh."
Yeah, yeah.
And he had never really thought about that. So you got this project. You were able to build it for the $7 million, I take it, or less.
Yeah, we came in 85 cents a square foot less than the traditional. Plus, they bought a company as we were in design. And so we had to reconfigure half of a floor. It only cost $5,000 because it was the materials. The labor was the same. We came in 4 weeks under the original estimate. So yeah, it was a win-win-win-win. And they're still using the same solution, 15 years later.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a precursor to all the things that we're doing. Because one of the great things about being in Canada, and you got to get yourself up here and hang out in Ottawa, just like we did in Driggs. But one of the great things about Canada is it has the most sustainable forest in the world.
Really?
And so we are starting to look at cross-laminated timber for every building project in Canada. The problem is you can't get the lumber across. There's one rail line that I took with my friend Margaret Atwood and her husband when I went from Toronto to Vancouver, and we talked about books for 4 days, and Graham Gibson and I closed down the Scotch Shore a few nights, but that's a tale for another day. But if you have one rail line across a country like Canada, you can't move very much stuff. So there's a lot of infrastructure issues, but cross-laminated timber and that whole business is right in line with exactly what you're saying. You're manufacturing this stuff to be assembled rather than assembling from a stick-built set of drawings. And it's awesome.
Well, in different skill level, you've got technicians versus carpenters. You've got, so you don't have, there's a shortage of trades. There's so many problems it solves, but again, we're still stuck with kind of doing things the way we've always done it.
Right. Yeah. I had Tom Souls and a couple of his buddies on a few weeks ago. He used to run SMACMA, which is the sheet metal air conditioning national association. And I had these guys talking about, where are we getting our trades and what are we doing to attract trades? And they were actually pretty optimistic about it, that they were beginning to see and people come in. I looked at the jobs in construction numbers over the last few weeks, and there are more jobs. People are taking more jobs in construction than was expected. So that part of the supply chain we might be moving in the right direction for that, especially with an emphasis on safety, where the job's not as dangerous. It's still a tough job, though. I mean, you build something in Canada, you're there at 30 below zero centigrade, and that's chilly by any standard.
It is for Texas, that's for sure.
Yeah, even for Texas, it's chilly. Even in big sized, outsized chilliness, it's chilly. It's as chilly as that Super Bowl that got ice balled out back in the day when I was living in Dallas. All right, so you moved from this project, and you eventually got hooked up with Tag Consulting, and those guys.
Good memory, yeah, good memory.
And they were you were helping them, and they were helping you, and at some point, like most of us, we're helping them more than they're helping us, so we have to kind of move on. But at Tag, at least you got exposure to. I know you were working with the FAA. You were working with a number of federal agencies while I was trying to help the Veterans Affairs Department with Mark Allison, and we were trying to do some stuff to reinvent hospitals. But you finished you finished the commercial real estate revolution. And how did that have an immediate impact on your life? I know it had an immediate impact on the lives of so many people who were in the lean world, but did that jump you to the front of the stage?
Well, it's interesting. Mark was part of that research, and he was a huge skeptic when we started. But his boss said, "Hey, get involved in this effort. I don't know what's going to happen." But he became kind of a pillar to our thinking. I called him the conscience of our work because he kept us honest through that. But yeah, so I went from the dealership I was with, and I came in and had cracked the code on prefab construction. I had the Hunt headquarters, I had AmerisourceBergen, I had Abbott Labs, I had Carroll Clinic. So I had a year from a dealership standpoint that was a $24 million year. But I was working with Hayworth on this next idea, on the commercial real estate revolution. And the owner of the company said, "Okay, make a decision today. Either you follow through and do this thing on construction you want to do, or you stay here, but you can't do both." So I turned in my resignation, which my wife was not happy about because of the commission. $24 million in sales, I had to walk away from the commission in that.
You were starting to get out of debt there pretty quickly.
I was, but I didn't because I pursued this effort. And again, it gets back to, what are you designed to do? This was what I was designed to do, this research with colleagues on big topics. That's what I do well. I bring people together to tackle big projects, and we figured it out together, and I wrote about it. So then after that book, I needed a place to go, and that was Tag Consulting. They brought me on. I'd written an earlier book on the future of the church in 2004.
Yep, I've got that one. I've got all your books here for some reason.
So they circled back to me. It was a timing thing, and they circled back to me. I came on board because they were Jungian psychologists. They looked at family systems dynamics in terms of organizational dynamics and change. And I was the only business guy in the group. So they threw me into the FAA very early on. And that really was the catalyst for my whole career, is cracking the nut with a very toxic federal agency and showing them that focusing on strengths instead of cutting people off at their knees every day was a whole better way of doing things.
Yeah. And then we were both rescued by Mark Concher, bless his heart. He took me after we finished that California prison healthcare project. Dan Fauché and I came out of that with I think we had 30 partnering gigs at like $10,000 a piece, ready to go.
Wow.
And the fact that the banks fell off the end of the earth meant that nobody had any money for construction, much less partnering. So all of those things went away. And LCI and Mark Concher saved us from, from doing
It must have
exactly
been
what
Mark
you were
that
doing.
connected the two of us.
Yes. Yep. So Mark has been important in both of our lives. But you
Yes.
did a lot of work with Balfour, as I did.
Yeah, right.
And I think that Mark was one of the original thinkers around, well, if we're going to collaborate, we need to know who we're collaborating with.
Right.
And it proved actually that not doing that at places like when we got into Disney, for instance, and we didn't do it on some of those projects, and we didn't really have that tool of understanding how you had to talk to people for them to understand. Because the thing that I love about Strength Finders and what you taught me was that there's very few people that actually think like I do.
It's
And
true.
there, there's a lot of people that aren't really quick on the uptake when they hear something that resonates with them. Man, they just grab that thing and they grab it like a a possum grabs a rat, which is a pretty interesting mental image if you think about it. But that there were people who can't hear you unless you allow them to be heard. Those folks that are very contemplative and very serious and very deep thinkers. That whole schemata, I've been trying to, as you know, every project I get on, I say, we need to bring in Rex. We need to do this Strength Finder thing. So people go, well, how much does it cost? I go, value costs money, friends. That's
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
so,
Well, it's kind of like the Fram oil commercial. You can pay me now or pay me later. I like
right.
to say that one of my roles is providing adult supervision for leaders that can't get along. And they either bring me in up front to get the dynamic and the alignment set, and what I really do is help get through that forming, storming stage faster.
Right.
Or they bring me in when it goes sideways and they wish they had brought me in earlier because
Right.
I make a lot more money in a screwed up project than I do with one trying to get it right.
Yeah. Well, that was, and if you remember, our logo at the realignment group was your project goes into the crapper, right? Down this way, and
Yeah.
then we get it right back up going again and then moving forward. And that was the whole genesis of that logo. Was we
Yeah.
were
I like
mostly
that.
called in early because projects had failed. And a lot of the work that Dan and I did in partnering and trying to understand project delivery rather than relationships, we left the relationships to you. We tried to figure out the silos and knocking over those silos and getting teams organized around the competencies that they had and the affinities that they wanted to make with their colleagues,
Right.
because they loved construction. And that was the work that we were doing while you were doing the work of getting people to understand who they're talking to. I remember one workshop you did, I think in Denver, and I think this was with what's his name, the guy with the tough name to pronounce that we met in Portland. And
Oh, Kyle McCroskey. Yeah.
Albatross, yeah.
Yeah.
And you took orange people or whatever and green people and you put them all in corners of the room and said, design this process. And then you mixed them up and said, well, go explain to these guys why they have to do it this way. And it was very contentious. It was very cool. It was one of my favorite workshops that you did.
Well, the exercise is called How to Design a Meeting That Sucks.
Right.
And that's the name of the exercise. Most people tell me we already know how to do that. But but you're right.
Not really.
Well, yeah. So I can remember when we were together with the FAA,
Right.
and I can remember when we were together with Duke Energy,
Yes.
and and one of the things that helped me in working with you is knowing how you're wired and to let you do your thing. So when I worked with you, I didn't have a structured agenda. We had a framework because you were gifted at responding to the energy in the room. You know, what where people were engaged, where they weren't engaged. And you know, it was these were some of the most fun workshops and most productive workshops because it was didn't feel scripted, didn't feel um, you know, it flowed. And that's a hard thing to create. I mean, I've been doing, you know, you and I have been doing workshops for a long time.
Right.
And so many of them are
Centuries, actually.
they're so schedule driven or checklist driven or whatever. And they get through the checklist, but they didn't really make an impact on anybody.
Yeah.
And that FAA workshop blew their minds. I mean, these are people who didn't believe that they could do something outside of their, you know, their procurement structure. And then when they started seeing the challenge or the problem of delivering projects on time within budget, they started saying, yeah, we might have some latitude in doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember touring that bunker that was that was part and parcel of the whole flight. What are those guys? Flight traffic controllers.
The in-route facility, yeah.
Yeah. And I was going, I thought this was going to be like a high tech, uh, spanking clean, unbelievable,
Yeah, no. 1970s technology with little dots on a screen.
Oh, and there was dust everywhere and things were
Yeah,
cords were hanging down
I know.
and it was just wow. It was pretty
And
amazing.
to know that we trust ourselves to fly every day to that,
Yes, I know. If we knew, and you and I do know,
we do know, yeah, and we're
and that's
still
why I take the train a lot. I love trains.
yeah.
And by the way, Mark Hunch is now in charge of rail for Balfour Beatty.
He is, yeah.
He's
So I'm working
fantastic.
with them on a couple more projects.
Try to get him
Um,
to build some trains, some
I
high-speed
met
trains.
I met I met Mark through John Tarpey.
Okay.
He read The Commercial Real Estate Revolution and then just sent me an email. He was in Dallas, that's where Balfour's headquarters was. And we had our first meeting in the what's the grill? It's the I can't remember the steakhouse, but anyway, steakhouse he always goes to. We ate there, we talked, and he said you need to meet Mark Conchar. And as soon as I met him, I said, "Whoa, this guy." Um,
He's something, isn't he?
yeah, he's something else. So we built a very strong relationship. By the way, Balfour has over 2,000 people in their company who've taken the strengths.
That's fantastic. So I'm trying to look up these the best steakhouses. There was one called like Bob's or
Old
something.
grill. It's the old grill. Hold on.
One was called Bob's Steak and Chop House, which was great.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Albernays was the one that I lived by. My apartment, I was in the parking lot of Albernays, which was quite the place. But there was one in that uptown section, right at the triangle of those things. It was like
This
True
was
Locks or something.
Well, Trulux was there. John liked that, and this was in the Crescent.
Mm.
Okay, now you got me looking it up.
Yeah, these are the. This is what happens to us. We get.
The Capitol Grill. That's it.
The Capitol Grill. Yeah, the Capitol Grill's all over the place.
Yeah, that was John's big place to go, and he paid. Thank
Yeah, good lobster bisque there, by the way.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I haven't done.
All
that
right,
yet.
so you got hooked up with Balfour, but you had some other big clients. I mean,
Yeah,
it was
I did.
funny that we were both on Intel in different ways,
Yes.
and we chased that Intel project that we won, and then they never gave us anything.
Well, I got back involved on an Intel project. I don't want to tell. It's one of my favorite stories because it got so contentious that it almost turned to fisticuffs.
Wow.
And it wasn't Intel directly. It was another contractor that was working on them, and they were $100 million over budget on a $350 million project. That breakthrough using strengths. So when the pressure hits, we go to fight or flight, and then we have what we call a kryptonite version of our best self. And the project manager and the general superintendent were wired so differently that they conflated the problems they were having with they built a narrative that this person must be insubordinate. And we were able to unwind that within a couple hours, and the senior vice president there said, I've never seen anything like that. So, this stuff really gets to the core of who we are and how we respond under pressure at our best. And when you're stuck and the whole project is stuck. And if I
Right.
told you the whole story, it would be a book, or it would be at least a chapter in a book.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And it's probably longer than an hour podcast, but
yes,
uh,
one of my favorite stories, though, because of the human dynamics that took place.
well, and I had, you had taught me that, try to, even if we can't do strength finders, there are clues, there are tells, triggers that you can tell, what kind of behavior people are engaging in. And I was on this All-American Canal, which was taking the dirt canal where 80% of the water comes into California and putting a concrete liner on it. And they had an environmental problem because this was out in the middle of the desert, and they had to use mobile generators. And if the mobile generators stayed out there longer than a year, they became stationary pollution sources, and that cost people a lot of money. So they had to hurry up this project. And one of the ways they were going to hurry it up was, instead of waiting for low water to fill the canal, they were going to fill it at high water. And the hydrologist who had to sign off on this thing um, said, no, we can't do that. And they said, well, we're just going to do it. So just sign off on it. And he issued a stop order. And they stopped work on this crucial project for getting water into California. And so Jim Kaufman, who was a paving contractor, and he was on this project. He was a tough guy in California. Called me up and said, hey, meet me out at the little airport on Saturday at 6:00. I'm taking you to El Centro. To kill me or what? He explained the problem. So I go down there and I'm listening to this guy I asked him what the problem was. And he said, it's not going to work. That was it. He wouldn't say anything else. So, and the contractors are all yelling at him going, this is costing us millions of dollars. And I said, why don't you guys leave for a second? And let me just talk to, Walter or whatever his name was. It sounds like Walter kind of guy. So I said, Walter, can you explain to these guys what the issue is? He said, I would love to explain it to them, but they won't listen to me. So no, I'm not going to explain it. So I went, okay. So I recognized this as that guy in that far left, southwest corner of the world, off the charts.
Yeah.
I went out to these guys and said, you're just going to have to bite your finger for an hour and a half, because it's going to take this guy an hour and a half to explain to you his theory of water hydraulics and what's wrong with this thing. And they went, no, we're not doing that. And I went, okay, well then let's go home. And they went, all right. So they listened to him for an hour and a half. He explained what he was worried about. He was worried about a crush of water coming in and blowing up the canal, because the forces back up. And once they start backing up, there's no place for anything to go. So that what's going to release? The water doesn't break, right? So all these little coffer dams and everything breaks, and the thing's a disaster. So after he explained it, everybody went, oh, that's interesting. And I said, well, now are you prepared to say what they should do? Or he said, no, this is above my pay grade. I said, well, you're the guy. And he said, well, there's a guy in San Francisco that I know that I would rely on. So I said to these guys, get in the plane and go to San Francisco on Tuesday and just sit down with this guy. And they did that. And by Tuesday afternoon, the stop work order was done. They modified some of the things that they were doing.
Yeah.
But it really was the skill that I learned from you, that you have to take people where they are, because they're there for a reason.
Right. Yeah. And their strengths are they operate whether you like it or not, and they have a unique vantage point into whatever the problem is. It's interesting in that other project we were talking about. I've started using the phrase, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And that's really helped a lot of people who get stuck in conflating the problem and the personality dynamic and thinking that it's the other person's a jerk. And that's the problem, into moving forward, moving past the conflict and saying, okay, what's the greater mission we're on? How do we be effective in doing that? I mean, I just had this conversation 2 days ago with a large headquarters project in the Southeast. And it was clear the personality conflicts in there. And, when you hear one person said, I just have to bite my tongue every time in the meeting with the client,
Right.
project manager, I said, okay, if that's what you're doing, the other person's picking up on that vibe and you're not being effective. So let's rework this and talk about how do we be effective, not just bite our tongues to sit through something, because they've got some issues and some legitimate ones. You do too, but you guys are stuck. We got to get unstuck.
So you've largely worked with C-suite teams. I know you've been called in by those teams, and they're they're a different breed of tiger cat. Uh,
Yep.
just because they've all gotten there because they've been very successful, and when they're trying to forge a mission, I mean, Balfour was perhaps the most perfect client of all, because an English company comes in and they buy Centex that has its own culture. Then they buy Barnard or whatever in San Diego, and they have their own culture. And then they buy Howard S. Wright, who couldn't have had a more different culture
Yeah.
than those
R.T.
guys.
Dooley in the Southeast, and on and on and on and on. Yeah.
Yeah, and Parker Brinkerhoff eventually. And so
Right.
trying to, wrestle those guys to the ground must have been amazing. But how do you get in there with high-powered people, all of whom believe that they got there through their own gumption and everybody else got there through patronage or family money or something? They're
Wow. I wish I could say that I had a formula and I was successful at it. You know, and the pandemic has created an interesting dynamic that's brought us all to our knees. And the challenge with C-suite, well, tell you a short story. So one of the companies I was working with, safety is a pillar to their whole mission statement. It's in all their literature. Numbers were going up. I was brought into an executive meeting to sit in, and they were showing how safety incidences were in the increase. And I was listening to it, and I finally got frustrated. And I said, I don't think safety is really important to you guys. And of course, they got offended and say it's a principle. And I said, okay, let me just replay what I've heard. This whole meeting has been around meeting targets, meeting goals, spreadsheets, projections, forecasts, all of that. We've had this 30-minute section on safety. Have any of you been to a site where there was a safety incident to check on it? Nobody had. And I said, okay, will anybody get fired if there's increase in safety incidences? Or will somebody get fired if they don't meet their numbers? And I said, based on the amount of time dedicated in this meeting and what you've talked about, it's more important to make your numbers than to be safe. But the numbers, there's nowhere on your mission, vision, values where numbers comes in, but safety does. I said, there's a huge disconnect here. Now, that caused the team, one of the executives heard it, came back and said, we need to take this seriously. And they found somebody who lives and breathes safety, and they put the right person in. But the challenge is the leadership teams are so disconnected from what's happening that I wish I could say I was more effective in bringing change there. But until you're willing to be fired or say something to just show, yeah, this is you're in your own little bubble creating these things. They have nothing to do with what's going on in real life. And you think, I mean, even the roll up of several companies and the contrast in cultures and using whether it's a McKinsey or Bain strategy to do that, that is so destructive. And it takes years and years to recover from taking this highly strategic tactical approach to things that are highly organic and cultural. Most leadership teams never catch it, never get it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that the power of lessons learned that are left behind is extraordinary to me. I mean, I was called in on a 911 for a hotel that had to be it was hosting the Super Bowl, and in April, their schedule was showing that they'll be done next April. And unfortunately, the Super Bowl happens in February.
Yes.
And in order for the NFL to go there, they had to be able to get into, heads on beds, as they say in the hotel business, by December 15th. So the challenge was to take, 4.5 months out of what was a 12-month schedule. And these guys said, well, we just can't do it. I said, you're right. You cannot do it. You cannot take 4.5 months out of a 12-month schedule. You can invent a 6.5-month schedule. So let's go to everybody.
I love the reframe. What a reframe.
Let's go to everybody and find out what they need to do to get this thing done in 6.5 months. And we hired, I think, 10 more superintendents. We did a geographic redistribution of the work. So we had smaller batches. People weren't in charge of whole big giant areas. They were in charge of get this done and get this done. And we had stickies everywhere. And December 17th, they had somebody sleeping in that hotel.
Wow.
And the company that called me in to help with that wouldn't use that as like one of their national marketing things because they were embarrassed that they got into the situation in the first place. And it cost them a bunch of money to get out of it. And I'm going, this is one of the greatest stories of all time.
Yeah.
This is like, Jesus comes back and he's in Toledo, Ohio, and nobody's telling anybody because they're embarrassed that they didn't recognize him, right? It's just like, it's crazy.
Well, it's hard to recognize anybody in Toledo, but that's true.
Yeah. Well, I love Toledo. Come on.
I was born in Toledo. I was actually born in Toledo.
Really? My
Yes.
mother was born in Zanesville, which is around there someplace.
Yeah.
So anyway, So most of the time when I'm working with teams, I'm working in the trailer with the guys, and it seems to me, and a few gals now, which is great. I'm having Jennifer Kahn on the podcast next week. She works for Ellis Dawn, and we're talking about diversity in construction because I don't want to focus on women in construction or this in construction because it almost seems it seems disrespectful to have a conversation about, well, so what can women do in construction, right? It sounds better to have a conversation about, there's 100% of the population that could work in construction. And if you've decided women are not included in that, your resources are down to now 48%. And if you start discriminating against no wonder you have trouble attracting people. Right. But one of the things that I think's really important about working in the trailer is that most of those folks just want to get their work done. They don't want to be, they don't want to be slowed down by somebody in front of them. They don't want to have to go back to their truck to get a screwdriver. They don't want to have to wait on materials. They don't want to go into a room and find that 40% of their drywall has been saw cut because people have been using it as a table bench. They just want to get their work done. And in some ways, they're much easier to deal with than executives, I think. So you've worked with teams in trailers and at the worker level. Um, is that a relevant observation, or is that just crazy talk?
Totally. I mean, you and I were on a project in Central Florida, um, and one of the things we did there, I think here's an opportunity for teams. Everybody comes in with their functional hat. I'm an MEP. I'm an electrical. I'm an electrician. I'm a carpenter. I'm whatever. And so they sit kind of silent, waiting for their moment. And what
Right.
we came up with in Florida is we came up with two things. One is we looked at people's strengths and we asked, what can you bring to the team that's unique based on how you're wired? And then the other thing you created is this hot topics thing that, okay, you may not be in the middle of this conversation, but if you're not, this is where you go to do the hot topics. Now, in the strengths,
That was such a great idea.
it was a great idea. So, so, but the strengths thing, I can remember, I don't know if you remember this big old dude, I don't know which firm he was with, but we asked each person, what really pisses you off about the meetings you have based on your strengths? What's your gut tell you that we could improve? And one guy said, the food sucks here. We come together for 3 days, once a month, food sucks. And we said, okay. And he had strengths called maximizer and positivity. It's kind of the have
I think
fun.
that was John, the mechanical guy. I remember him.
Okay. He was a big guy, right?
Big guy, yeah.
So the next day he comes in with his barbecue stuff from someplace in the swamps of Florida, and everybody loves it. But the thing that was the most poignant moment is watching him on the side with his arms folded with a big grin,
Right.
because people were appreciating him for the unique thing he brought to the team.
Yeah, I remember that was a great story. That project, you'll remember that I was calling you from the airport to pick me up, and I
Oh
couldn't
yeah,
find
yeah,
you.
yeah. I don't know how you even made it to that project.
And we were in so somehow I got
Which airport did
confused.
you fly into?
I flew into Fort Lauderdale,
Yes.
and this was in Jacksonville,
Yes.
and this was 9 o'clock at night. And I'm saying, Rex, I'm at Terminal 3, and you're going, dude, there is no Terminal 3 here. And I went, well, why do all these people have Fort Lauderdale shirts on? So I rented a car and I drove all
Yeah.
night, as Celine Dion says,
Yeah.
and I made
You're
it.
you're a crazy man, because I would not have even been able to get out of bed in the morning.
That was pretty wild. And the reason I did that is because I was so tired from my gig in DC that I just hopped on the first plane that said it was nonstop to a Florida destination without thinking about it. So
Florida is a big state. It's kind of like Texas.
I
There's a
can
little
attest
bit
to
of
that
room
now.
in between. Yeah.
I can certainly attest to that now.
Yeah.
Um,
That's so funny.
well, this has been great. Let's talk a little bit about the ranch, because I know the ranch has been
Ranch.
has been one of those things. I mean, you're one of those guys that sees, what people need, and then you just figure out, how you're going to do it. And I'm sure you saw that, like the Steinway you bought for your son. That is such a great story as
Yeah.
well. Does he still have that Steinway?
Yeah, it's downstairs, and he comes every weekend and practices. He's graduating, but now he's going into electrical engineering as a second degree
Oh, wow.
in order to do music production. That's what he wants to do.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But
So it's
you
all,
went to some town in South Texas, and some guy
oh my
who
gosh.
had the
What a
largest
character.
supply of
Bruno.
Steinways somewhere.
Bruno Santo had this little small town. His shop was completely papered over with windows. You walk in, there were 45 Steinways. In the small little town, you would never know. Most of the town, the shops are closed. We had to stay in a Best Western the night before. And we go through this experience that is unlike any experience you would ever go through. We spent 3 hours in the morning just going through how a Steinway is constructed and looking at the pieces and parts. Then he interviews Tyler on what he likes. Then he goes out into the floor of 45 and pulls off the covers. has 12 pianos, and he has them play, and he sits there with each one and asks them, what did you like? What did you didn't like? And he's listening and writing down. Then we go down to 4 pianos and then to 1. And the piano Tyler picked happened to be Van Cliburn's piano. Yeah, it was a mahogany. So it was the only one that wasn't black. It was mahogany used. It was $75,000.
Wow.
So I didn't say anything, kept my cool. I called Bruno back. I said, Bruno,
That's a lot of money.
We've never had a real piano. If this is your son, what would you do? And what piano would you pick? So he helped us pick one. It wasn't 75,000. It still wasn't cheap as the used. It was 45,000 used cheap. But that was an incredible experience, and we still have that piano. And the deal was he would buy it back at any time for the price we paid. So that was kind of a nice.
That's fantastic. Well, I love that story because it shows that, there's so many people that feel like they're stuck in their lives. And they say, wow, I've got this, really brilliant, aspiring, savant musician. And if I'm going to help him, I have to give him the tools to be successful.
Yeah.
And what greater tool than a Steinway? I mean, you didn't start at the, like this keyboard in the back. It's a really good $238 keyboard.
Well, and the logic was that all the competitions that he would be on Steinways. His college would be on a Steinway. So he better learn the dynamics of a Steinway now so that,
Well,
that was the logic.
In my community, our community, the community of which we have, flirted with, value is the big thing, right? You're always trying to look for value to the owner, value to the guys on the team, value to whatever. And that story is such a great story of value because so many people would reject out of hand. I can't afford a Steinway. I mean, you were $150,000 in debt at one time. And you know what it's like to go buy something that you can't afford.
I wasn't much out of debt at that point. In fact, I wasn't out of debt. But
so before we lose it, tell me a little bit about the ranch because I think when I think of the Steinway story, I start thinking about the ranch.
So the ranch is 15 acres. It's 90 minutes southwest of DFW Airport. It's in a town called Glen Rose. Glen Rose is along a river. It's called the Paluxy River. The Paluxy River is known for its healing powers back in the 1800s. That's how the town was founded.
Wow.
And dinosaur fossils. So
like you and me.
Yeah. The dinosaur exhibition in the Natural History Museum in New York was from the Paluxy River. Found, it was a dinosaur formation found in the 1950s. Very pure water, mineral rich, and the property we purchased is historic. The house we're in is a 2-story. It's stone. It's petrified wood and fossils. 2 stories.
Wow.
That's what it's made out of. Built in 1919. It was originally a tabernacle because the waters brought all kinds of healers. They brought faith healers, church retreat revivals, magnetic healers, chiropractors. All that was around here in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Then it became a park. So it has remnants of little cabins along the bluff. We have 1,000 feet along the Paluxy River. Wow. And when we bought it, it had 7 buildings on it. So I'm back into the project management stage of building out. We have a small team facility that is that handles 8 to 10 people beautifully on the bluff. We're building out the meeting hall. And I don't know if you met Patrick Donnelly, but he's been an architect for this. It'll handle.
And you named it after him or something. You gave him credit for it.
Yeah, it's the Donnelly Barn. And then we've got a writer's cottage that we just finished. We've got a gazebo. We've got a maker space for team building. And what makes it unique, we've got a beautiful creek. We've got beehives that we just put in.
Yeah, I saw the beehives. That was an interesting. What is this shade that you make for people? That was a great line.
Yeah. Yeah, and who are your pollinators in the
Right.
organization? So this is a demonstration project on restoring ground that has been overgrazed and burnt out. I think it's very parallel to culture. The companies that have come so far, that's what they experience. They experience deeper connection. They experience, the process of building open vulnerability, trust, high connection, high alignment.
Do you have
For
to
a
jump
seven,
off the bluff into the river?
no, now, no, the bluff,
Not
the
yet.
bluff, the bluff is beautiful, and it goes down into a pasture land. So there's
Okay.
about probably 200 feet of pasture land, and then it's the river. But the
Gotcha.
bluff, the 20-foot bluff, the limestone along there is absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
It's a 7-minute walk to downtown, which makes it unique. There's no other property that
Yeah.
you can even come to.
So are you
And
living there full time now?
yeah, yeah, I'm
That's
in
fantastic.
I'm in the 2-story tabernacle right
Yeah.
now. Um,
Beautiful.
and we've experienced all the challenges construction projects are having. So it's
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And you should document them so that people
I
can
have.
see them.
Yeah, I've done little vignette videos. Some of them get posted to LinkedIn, but
Nice.
we're working on one of those challenges today with a materials person.
Awesome. Okay. Your latest book, you've written a ton of books. You've tackled all kinds of things. You tackled the real estate, really.
Project delivery.
It's funny that I think that the title "Commercial Real Estate Revolution" is really kind of a misnomer because it
Totally.
really is about the built environment gone wrong and all the creative people that came up with ideas on how to do it better, which was cool. And it was funny that Art Gensler, once he read it, so he was a sponsor of it, and then once he read it, he went, "I'm not sponsoring this."
Yeah,
Are
yeah.
you
And
crazy? So I love
yeah,
that. I love that fact. That's it. That's
yeah.
one of the
And I
great.
had to tell him, I'm sorry, we can't make any changes.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And then you went on to do Change Your Space, Change Your Culture. I think was the second one.
Yep.
Then you
And Mark
tackled the
Conchar is a
education system.
co-author. Yep. Then we
Just
tackled.
as Concher's kids were entering school, you
Yeah.
took on the education system. I thought there was some symbiosis there. There was
Yeah.
didn't seem like a coincidence necessarily to me. And then you had twerk or whatever that. What's that nudge? Yeah, it
Nudge,
wasn't.
yeah,
It wasn't
healthy
twerk.
workplace nudge, yeah, and then we had Whole, which was a book that got into kind of the emotional, the mental well-being of teachers, the stress,
Oh,
the trauma, and the built environment. You know,
nice.
so the process is bring all these smart people together, go visit a location that's an outlier,
Right.
figure out how they survived and how they got away with doing what they were doing, and then reverse engineer it.
Which
That's
is such
the
a
name of the
great.
book.
I mean, it's such a great way to go, and I can see that you've got extra copies of these things behind you because I recognize,
Yeah.
yeah, all the titles.
And a new book
So,
coming out.
so what's the new book? Who was on the team? What was your hypothesis,
This
and
was
what
a
did you
solo
find out?
book. Yeah, so this was a solo book that came out of the
Oh,
pandemic, and it's called The Genius Spark. And the difference between prior to the pandemic till now, I was doing more workshops, parachuting in, doing the magic trick, leaving. But during the pandemic, I was doing coaching consistently with the same people for a long time, watching them ebb and flow emotionally. And I started asking people, what gets you up in the morning? What's your purpose? Zero people out of 150 I was coaching had a clear answer for that.
mm,
Then a piece of the puzzle came together for me. NASA did research in the 1960s and created an assessment to find the best and the brightest for the moonshot program. George Land, I don't know if you know who George Land is, but he's a famous system scientist, came up with the S curve.
was he part of Polaroid Land?
No, he wasn't. He
Okay,
was he was a different guy, but he was brilliant and created this assessment. It's the kind of assessment that looked for critical thinking and creativity, and it was in a format that even kids could take. So he gave it to 1,600 preschoolers. 98% tested as creative geniuses.
Really?
Then his next question is, I wonder what will happen over time. So he tracked those kids until their 30s. By age 15, it went from 98% to 12%. By
Wow.
age 30, it went down to 2%. I was that 2% person in the dot-com crash. When my life crashed, I was successfully normal. And what Gallup says is that the happiest, most successful people are abnormal. They play to their strengths. They don't try to fix their weaknesses. They're not, they don't try to be belligerently different, but they're comfortable in their skin, and they keep that unique curiosity and keep in tune with how they're wired to be uniquely happy and successful. So I started working with that with individuals, helping them create a word picture of what they look like at their best and how to weave that into their narrative and their story. And that evolved into the book, The Genius Spark. And
Cool.
that's been the most powerful thing I've run across in, the last 25 years, to really make it simple and easy for people to begin to shift and recapture. I call the work we do archaeology. Get rid of the rubble to find out that unique, original individual that you were at 5.
Yeah.
That kind of died a slow death over time, and now we can revive it.
Wow. Fantastic. And is it available now, or when's it coming out?
No. I'm working with Gallup because they're the 800-pound gorilla, and because we're referencing their research, I have to go through the process of making sure it aligns with their research. It doesn't confuse people as to what it is, and basically that that I've created something they consider to be original and not completely off of their IP. It's a derivative, but
Right.
it is unique. And I've got one more hurdle. I'm working with their attorneys. Working with attorneys on things like this, you never get told, hey, thumbs up, you're doing good.
Right.
The most you're told is, you've addressed the question that I gave you. That's
Right.
that's as good as you get. And you're an attorney, you know what that's like.
Yeah. And I played one on TV. I've got the best of all worlds.
Yeah.
Well, man, it's been great catching up with you.
Yeah, you too.
Good luck with
Thank
that
you.
project. I got to get down to the ranch. I got to come visit you.
You do have to come back to the United States. We will still embrace you here in the States.
There's so much crazy stuff going on down there. I mean, so I live in Ottawa, and you may have heard of the convoy. The Freedom Convoy that
Freedom Convoy, right.
that came in and captured the city. So my house is in the geographic center of the red zone. And so for 4 weeks, people were driving up and down my street, honking their horn and waving flags and carrying on. And obviously, it wasn't something that I was really thrilled with. And I turned to one of my friends and I said, "How did all these Americans get into Ottawa?"
Yeah, but it's kind of a viral thing that was spurred. If you read Jonathan Haidt, Haidt.
Yep, I know him.
His book, The Coddling of the American Mind, gives you some insight as to what's happening today.
Yeah.
And the Ray Dalio's book, The Changing World Order, those are 2 must reads for any leader today, to kind of get grounded into, where's this nuttiness coming from? How long is it going to last? And how do I navigate it?
Yeah. It's the parade of the knuckleheads, but they didn't get there on their own, and they're not going to go home on their own either. So it is something.
We have to be effective, not right.
So yeah. So I'm going to I will venture back down to the States. I think the LCI convention is in New Orleans this year, so
yes, it is.
Not that far.
That's not far from us.
No, so maybe I'll pop over before or after, and see you and the wife and the kids and the bees.
We have a guest house for you, so
you are the best, man.
Yeah.
Always good to catch up with you. See you soon.
Yeah, you too. Love you, man.
I love you, buddy. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All righty. Adios.
Adios.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.